Good morning, I'm Taylor Wilson, and today is Thursday, January 16th, 2025. This is The Excerpt. Today, a ceasefire has been reached between Israel and Hamas. Plus, Biden says farewell in an address to America. And we have the latest from Senate confirmation hearings ahead of the Trump White House. After months of deadlock, Israel and Hamas have reached a deal for a Gaza ceasefire and hostage release agreement. I spoke with USA Today World Affairs correspondent Kim Helmgard to learn more.
Kim, thank you so much for making some time on this.
Thanks so much for having me.
So let's just get the kind of A, B's, and C's here, Kim. What are the details of this ceasefire?
The parameters of this deal, as far as we understand, were actually sketched out in May last year, and it's taken months since then for it to sort of finally come to fruition. The finer points of this deal are still kind of emerging, but from what we understand anyway, it's a deal that's going to unfold in three phases. The first phase, which is expected to last about 6 weeks, will see possibly up to 33, 34 hostages released and several hundred Palestinian prisoners released from Israeli jails. During that time, there will be some Israeli troop withdrawals from parts of Gaza and some other bits and pieces that we're still finding out about. At that point, if the truce holds, there would be a move to the second phase. Some of the mediators involved here, this is the US, the Qataris, and to a lesser extent the Egyptians, have said that they hope that they can get from phase one to phase two, and then ultimately to phase three, which would sort of be, I think we can say, sort of the start of the end of the war, and a reconstruction plan for Gaza would be unveiled, and so on and so forth. But really, where we're at now is waiting for Sunday, January 19th, when we believe the ceasefire will take effect, and we also believe, although things can move around, that the first couple of hostages from Gaza will be released. But again, we don't know for sure, and we don't know the identities of those hostages.
Wow. Okay. So big developments. You mentioned some of the major international players that helped make this happen, Kim. How involved really was the US here?
There's a big old curtain drawn back in front of all of our eyes. We don't have access to the room. Few people do beyond those mediators, but the US is heavily involved. It's been interesting to observe over the last few months, really, since President-elect Trump won the election. There has been a steady increase in the tempo of US insistence that this needs to happen. A lot of this has come from Trump. But I think what we should say is that both Biden's top diplomat, Blinken, Middle East affairs officials, and so on from the Biden administration, and Trump's new Middle East envoy have both been involved deeply with the mediation efforts.
What is different now, Kim, after over a year of this specific conflict? I mean, why were they able to reach a deal this week?
The short answer to that question is we don't actually know. I mean, as I alluded to earlier, I think that people observing this from a distance might conclude that Trump has been voluble on this issue. He's said some quite forthright things about wanting to make sure that there is a deal in place by the time he is inaugurated on January 20th. So that's one part. Also, as the war has dragged on, there's no question that it's been weakened. And certainly, a lot of its leadership has been killed. And there's been a lot of moving parts in the region more broadly as Israel has, I think we can say, sort of bested Hezbollah in Lebanon. There's been a regime change in Syria. The Houthis in Yemen have been under constant sort of bombardment by the Israelis and in some cases the Americans. And all of those players have been weakened, and all of those players are backed by Iran. Iran itself has looked not quite the big player that it's tried to project in recent years. Iran, of course, is a big backer of Hamas. A third part to this, I think, is just that there's been, maybe this is an obvious point, but there has just been constant pressure from inside Israel, from family members, from organizations that are kind of lobbying Prime Minister Netanyahu to make this happen. And so it's become increasingly hard for Prime Minister Netanyahu to come up with an excuse as to why this deal isn't happening. His corruption trial is still taking place. It's hard to say. I mean, another possible factor here could be the Trump-Netanyahu relationship is somewhat tighter than the Netanyahu-Biden relationship, and perhaps Trump has been speaking to Netanyahu, whispering in his ear about how he needs to make this happen. But, we're kind of wading into the realm of speculation. Observers, officials, have been wondering why President Biden, with one foot out the door, has been able to seemingly exert much more pressure now, just days before he leaves office, compared to, the last 15, 16 months. And did he suddenly rally and find that ability because he didn't want Trump to take credit? Or was there something else in the background? We don't really know. But these are sort of political lenses on some of the possible scenarios around why now? Why just days before Trump takes office?
All right. Well, as we say, lots of developments still to come in this. Folks can stick with usatoday.com for the latest. Kim Helmgard covers world affairs for USA Today. Thank you, Kim.
Thanks so much.
In the hours since the ceasefire was announced, Israel intensified strikes on Gaza, according to residents and authorities there, ahead of the truce's expected start on Sunday. President Joe Biden bid goodbye to the American people last night, saying in a farewell address to the nation that serving as president has been the highest honor of his life. Biden touted job creation during his tenure, as well as this week's ceasefire. But while he celebrated the past, Biden also warned of dangers in the future.
Today, an oligarchy is taking shape in America of extreme wealth, power, and influence that literally threatens our entire democracy, our basic rights and freedoms, and a fair shot for everyone to get ahead.
Meanwhile, Biden never mentioned President-elect Donald Trump by name, but he called for the passage of a constitutional amendment to make sure that no president is immune from crimes he or she commits while in office. In July, the Supreme Court ruled that presidents cannot be prosecuted for official acts during their time in office. The court's ruling stemmed from the Justice Department's case against Trump over his efforts to overturn the 2020 election. Trump, who was impeached twice during his first term, became the first former president to hold a criminal record after he was convicted in New York last year on 34 felonies involving hush money payments. But Biden ended his address with soaring language intended to lift up Americans.
After 50 years of public service, I give you my word. I still believe in the idea for which this nation stands. A nation where the strength of our institutions and the character of our people matter and must endure. Now it's your turn to stand guard. May you all be the keeper of the flame. May you keep the faith. I love America. You love it too. God bless you all. And may God protect our troops. Thank you for this great honor.
You can read more from Biden's address with a link in today's show notes. He's entering his final days as president ahead of Donald Trump's inauguration on Monday. We saw more Senate confirmation hearings yesterday for some of President-elect Donald Trump's cabinet picks. I caught up with USA Today White House reporter Zach Anderson for more. Zach, hello, sir.
Hello.
So, Zach, let's just start by talking about Pam Bondi. This is Trump's pick for Attorney General. What was the general mood from her hearing? And I'm curious, how hard was she grilled on this issue of whether the Department of Justice can be expected to be independent here in a new Trump era?
Yeah, Democrats, this is one of the biggest issues that they're concerned about going into a second Trump administration. Trump was very aggressive on the campaign trail, going after the Department of Justice. He really blames the agency for some of the prosecutions against him, described it as lawfare, weaponization of justice, and has promised big changes. And Democrats are worried that he's going to do exactly what he's accused the agency of doing under Biden, which is politicize it, go after his political enemies. And so obviously Pam Bondi, as a nominee to lead the Department of Justice, got a lot of those questions. They really asked her about whether she could be more neutral, what she would do if Trump tried to interfere in a prosecution or tried to order prosecution of his political enemies. They really grilled her pretty aggressively.
You know, maybe one of Trump's less controversial picks was Marco Rubio, who he's tapped for Secretary of State. And it seems like Democrats were more quick to warm up to him on this day. Is that correct?
Yeah, Rubio's been around the Senate for a long time. He sort of appeals to a broad range of Republicans, and also he has good relationships with Democrats. So he's really considered a slam dunk nominee for Secretary of State. He's been very involved in foreign affairs issues in the Senate. That's really been his wheelhouse, especially in Latin America. So he's very experienced on the issue. He ran for president. He's been in the Senate for more than a decade, and he's built those relationships. So Democrats were really praising Rubio during a Senate hearing, talking about how qualified he was and that they were happy that Trump had nominated him. He will be confirmed overwhelmingly.
Let's bring Project 2025 back into the conversation. It seems to just not be going away. I know it came up during the hearing of Russell Vought, Donald Trump's choice to lead the Office of Management and Budget. Just remind us, Zach, what Project 2025 is and what was Vought pressed on here?
Yeah, Project 2025 is sort of the blueprint for the second Trump administration, which kicks off in 2025, that was put forward by the Heritage Foundation, which is a conservative think tank that's really been a part of sort of the Republican policymaking for a long time, very intertwined with the GOP. They put out, it was more than 800 pages of ideas for what they wanted to do in the second Trump administration. And Democrats really poured through that and picked out some of the more controversial things and really hammered Trump on them during the campaign. And he disavowed Project 2025. He tried to distance himself from it, said he didn't have anything to do with it, even though there were people that he was close to that helped write it. And he ended up hiring people for his second administration who were some of the authors of Project 2025, including the individual that you mentioned, who was up for a confirmation hearing as director of the Office of Management and Budget. And he was grilled by a Democratic senator who said, he was concerned that you're one of the architects of Project 2025. So Trump tried to distance himself from it during the campaign. He really viewed it as a headache, but it continues to be something that he's being dogged with. And that's because he's continuing to associate with people who are involved in it.
Do you have one kind of broad general takeaway from the day's hearings overall, Zach? I mean, what really caught your eye and stood out?
We're really starting to see the Trump's, supporting cast here really emerge into the public eye. They continue to be have some very controversial people. Pam Bondi is not necessarily controversial in the sense that she was the Attorney General of Florida. Even Democrats acknowledge that she's very qualified, but she's, considered kind of a Trump loyalist. She was one of his attorneys for his first impeachment and defending him. And she also went and investigated election issues after the 2020 election. He sent her to Pennsylvania. So there continues to be some pretty aggressive questioning by Democrats. We're seeing sort of, there was questions after the election about how aggressively they would resist Trump in his second administration after he had a pretty significant win. And we're seeing with Pete Hegseth, the defense secretary nominee on Tuesday, and now with Pam Bondi on Wednesday, that the Democrats are willing to resist here when they feel it's appropriate. And they are asking some pretty pointed questions, but they're also just sort of picking and choosing their shots, because you see with a lot of the other nominees like Rubio or Sean Duffy for the Department of Transportation or John Ratcliffe for CIA, where they've been greeted pretty warmly, not nearly as contentious. So Democrats are resisting when they feel it's appropriate.
All right, Zach Anderson covers the White House for USA Today. Thanks for the breakdown, as always, Zach.
Thank you.
President-elect Donald Trump is considering issuing an executive order after he takes office next week to try to save TikTok as the deadline approaches for the social media platform to sell off its U.S. assets or be banned from the country, according to the Washington Post and CNN, citing unnamed sources. The potential executive order would look to allow TikTok's 170 million American users to continue to use the app while the administration sorts out who could potentially buy it, according to a CNN report yesterday. Congress passed a law in April that requires TikTok's Chinese parent company ByteDance to divest TikTok's American assets if the app wants to maintain a U.S. presence after Sunday. TikTok has challenged the law in court, arguing it violates the First Amendment right to free speech. The Supreme Court has not yet ruled, but it appeared poised to uphold the law when it heard arguments last week. Across the country, there's widespread agreement that the U.S. health insurance system is broken.
People are frustrated. They've complained to policymakers, they've complained to the insurance companies, they've complained to their employers, and everything has just bubbled up because nothing seems to work.
What solutions are on the table? Vivian Ho, chair in health economics at Rice University, joins the Excerpt to share her thoughts with my colleague Dana Taylor. You can find that conversation right here beginning at 4 p.m. Eastern Time today. And thanks for listening to The Excerpt. You can get the podcast wherever you get your pods. And if you're on a smart speaker, just ask for The Excerpt. I'm Taylor Wilson, and I'll be back tomorrow with more of The Excerpt from USA Today.